All right, the number of participants has stabilized, so I suggest that we kick off this session. Thank you very much for joining today's presentation of the Sea Cargo Charter. I'm Louise Dobler, project manager at the Global Maritime Forum, who was part of the team leading the development of the Sea Cargo Charter and now acting as the secretariat for the charter. The charter was launched only 2 weeks ago, and I'm very pleased and honored that the first presentation that we do after the launch is for the IMO delegates as some sort of an official side event. I know it's a very busy week for you, so thank you for taking the time. We'll make sure to keep it short and to finish on time. Allow me to also very quickly thank the UK delegation for sharing the invitation as well with you. Very much appreciate. And I will be moderating the session. I'm pleased to introduce also the two speakers, who are also two of the signatories of the Sea Cargo Charter. We have Andrew Barker, Global Operations and Sustainability Lead at Cargill Ocean Transportation. He's been one of the initiator of the Sea Cargo Charter together with Trafigura. And our second speaker represents Shell, one of the biggest charters. So we have Claire Wright, General Manager, Commercial Shipping and Strategy at Shell Shipping and Maritime, joining us today as well. And this session is going to be recorded, and we have about 45 minutes together. We'll spend approximately the last 20 minutes or so answering questions. So I will invite all of you, if you have any question as we go along the first part of that is more presentation style, to just drop your questions in the Q&A in the chat box on Zoom. And we'll select a couple of relevant questions for our Q&A, and we'll make sure to answer after that in case we don't get to discuss all of them. This webinar is by invitation only, and so only you and IMO delegates have been receiving the invitation. The media has not been invited, and we are under Chatham House rules. So whatever you say or whichever question you ask in the chat box, please be assured that we won't be attributing them to any of you. I'd like to use this opportunity before we kick off to thank all of the 17 signatories, launching signatories, which you can see on the screen right now. Thank you for your commitment and leadership. And now, without further ado, I'm handing over to Claire.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to present a little background about the Sea Cargo Charter to you this morning. I will give some background to the Sea Cargo Charter, and then Andrew will expand upon some of the details. And then, as Louise said, we'll be available to answer questions that you may have. So in Shell, we recognise the need for all parts of the shipping value chain to join in the decarbonisation journey. And as Louise said, we are a major charter of ships and also a fuel supplier, so we have quite a significant role to play. The ambition to develop the Sea Cargo Charter began in the early stages of the Poseidon Principles, which I think many of you are familiar with. Some of the drafting group of the Poseidon Principles voiced the need for a transparent process for measuring and reporting emissions relating to chartering activities. And the drafting group worked during 2019 to design a set of initial principles, which became the Sea Cargo Charter. The 4 core principles are the same for the Poseidon Principles and the Sea Cargo Charter, but obviously, as they're measuring different things, the 2 frameworks rely on different metrics. The Charter's targets are fully aligned with those of the IMO, and they're a way for us charterers to work towards meeting the IMO's ambitions. So it's a framework for us to prioritise carbon intensity reduction in line with the IMO. Do you want to move to the next slide, Louise? So the Sea Cargo Charter enables us charterers and cargo owners, anyone with a role in the movement of the cargo, to measure and report emissions from their chartering activities. It enables us to work together to improve the quality of the data, to enhance transparency, and to create a global baseline from which we can move to reduce. And we see this as a very important step in laying the foundations for a net zero emission shipping industry. And we see in Shell, we see cross-sector collaborations like this as vital to scale up the customer demand for low and zero carbon shipping, which enables us to work together to meet the IMO's ambitions and to drive towards zero. And I think now Andy will, on the next slide, move into some of the details. So perhaps I can hand over to you.
Okay, all right, so I'm unmuted. Right, thanks very much, Claire. So again, thanks for inviting me here today to explain a little bit about the Sea Cargo Charter. So what are some of the objectives and scope of the Sea Cargo Charter? So the objective really was to come up with a global baseline to support and allow charters to have a framework to consistently measure their chartering activities and to make sure they're more environmentally responsible. When we started looking at it, is really around making sure we're looking at the CO2 emissions. So that's really all we've been measuring at this point. And the charter is for dry and wet bulk charterers. So we talk about charters, but it's also as well for operators. So there are many companies today that may be ship owners, but also operate quite a lot of ships as well. So this gives an ability for the operational piece to be part of this scope of that too. So Louise, can we go to the next slide, please? Right, so then we talked about the principles, and then we had 4 different principles. So the first one was around the assessment, to make sure as well that we are assessing the chartering activities, making sure that there is a methodology for a consistent way of calculating. Then it became for the signatories to be accountable in terms of ensuring they providing the right information, making sure they have reliable data and the sources. And either using service providers or making sure that they have a robust way to be able to come up with the specific data required. And then from an enforcement point of view, we wanted to make sure that the Secretariat of the Sea Cargo Charter was able to really sort of validate some of the data, but also making sure that the signatories themselves have the right tools to be able to collect the data. So if you're taking a ship on time charter, you have all that data already in terms of the fuel consumption. But if you're not, and you are essentially taking ships on voyages, you need to make sure that there's a way to be able to capture that data. So the Sea Cargo Charter Clause enables charters to be able to ask the ship owners themselves to calculate and to give that fuel consumption. And the last thing was really around transparency, to make sure as well that the information would be published, right? So that was nothing that was going to be hidden, and it's going to be clear, transparent to the industry about the emissions that the Sea Cargo Charter Secretariat, the signatories, were able to provide. And then helps as well in terms of sort of working out where we are on a baseline, and so we can start to improve going further forward. So go to the next slide, please. So if you look at the graph here, you can sort of see as well the trajectory here with the IMO initial strategy to reduce the total annual greenhouse gases emissions by at least 50% by 2050 compared to 2008. What you can see quite clear there that already in 2020, we are starting with a fleet which is significantly more efficient than the 2008 fleet, with approximately 30% of improvements achieved on an EEOI metric base already. So you could also sort of make some comment to sort of say, well, are we being ambitious enough in terms of what we're trying to achieve by 2050? Can you go to the next slide, please, Louise? And so around the decarbonization trajectory, you can sort of see here that we're using the trajectories, using the IMO absolute reduction targets. We're also making sure as well that we're only considering the greenhouse gases considered to follow the approach taken by the IMO MEPC, and the Sea Cargo Charter will allow for revisions for new data and policy changes as we go forward. I mean, there was also a debate as well to sort of say, well, it's a straight line, right, going down. Is it really going to be like that? When you talk about new innovations, could it be maybe some step changes? We felt today to make this easy, we'll work on the trajectory, as you can see on the graphs there today, but it's something we'll look at as we go further forward. Louise, you want to go to the next slide, please? And calculating the climate alignment, the Sea Cargo Charter uses the EEOI to calculate climate alignment. As you can sort of see here, we're using CO2 grams per ton mile, which is really sort of enabling you to work out actually how much emissions you're doing for the cargo transported. From there, we need to make sure as well that you're also looking at vessel sizes. So if you're looking at a Cape-size vessel compared to a Panamax or a Handysize, there's going to be big differences in terms of how your footprint looks. And so it made it very clear to us that if we wanted to do this thing properly, you had to start looking at vessel categories. And so therefore you can sort of see how well you're progressing in your category in terms of the alignment. And then finally you can sort of see, so what is your differential? So where are you in that trajectory compared to your actuals as you sort of go down towards the 2050? Can you go to the next slide, please, Louise? And then in terms of transparency, each signatory needs to make sure on an annual basis they are reporting all the activities through the vessel categories, making sure that they are giving all the different data within those different sectors, and then therefore you can start to look at how well they're aligning versus the trajectories themselves. Right, and then the idea is as well that each of the signatories should be reporting as well their annual activity in their own reports. Okay, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what are the reasons why companies like Cargill and Shell have joined up? And I think first of all, you can sort of say it's the right thing to do. Right? Charters do have a role to play, and emissions should not just purely be on the owner's shoulders. Charters need to be accountable too, especially if they're operating the asset on time charter, as most of the time we are doing that. If we are to really make a difference, we need to include the entire value chain of the shipping industry. And the Sea Cargo Charter itself, we just remember, is not a substitute for IMO regulation. It is a framework for prioritizing carbon intensity reduction and increasing transparency. As Cargo, we've been reporting our emissions now for the past 3 years, as many others have been doing the same. However, there's always been slight differences in the way that we all report, and the Sea Cargo Charter really enables us to report in a transparent and consistent manner to an industry-agreed standard. It enables us to see how well we're performing year on year and how we are mapping versus our trajectory. And it's not just purely on the total, it's also looking at it in terms of how we're doing on the different sectors, because we're doing anything from a Capesize ship down to a coaster. So it's also important to see how we're doing in those different sectors as well. The other thing we're seeing as well is that our own customers are coming to us as well and asking for help in measuring emissions. As the world is becoming more environmentally friendly, customers themselves are being looking at it from their own perspective and asking us to see how we can help them. So as charters, we feel as well that we owe it to them to be able to look at their own footprint. And so therefore the Sea Cargo Charter is also helping us help our customers be able to map out and report their CO2 footprint for the cargoes that they transport. With that, I will hand over to Claire.
Thank you. Apologies for the slight delay. I didn't have control over unmuting myself. So I echo what Andrew said in terms of the motivations of why would we sign up to this charter. Shell's own ambitions related to decarbonisation are something we've been quite open about. And we recently, for shipping, outlined our ambitions in our Setting Shell's Course report, which we published a couple of weeks ago. And in there, we talk about the fact that we desire to be a net zero energy business by 2050 or sooner, in step with both society and the IMO's ambitions. And certainly we see the Sea Cargo Charter as a way, as a very large charter, and echoing what Andrew said, we have interests in ships across the size ranges and also in carrying different kinds of commodities and fuels across the world. And therefore we need to be able to be more consistent, and it makes sense at an industry level to be measuring in the same way to a consistent standard, so that we can track better our emissions across our shipping operations and then reduce them over time. Because we certainly see the importance of reducing the cumulative emissions of the shipping industry whilst we, and here I put my fuel supplier hat on, whilst we work to develop the zero carbon fuels that will enable the industry to move towards zero. And so we welcome the challenging performance standards from the IMO to help drive us to make those improvements to the global fleet. And certainly we see the Sea Cargo Charter as a way in which we can show as an industry that we are moving in step with those IMO targets. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you for this very succinct and clear presentation, and also about a bit reflecting why you joined the Sea Cargo Charter. We've been receiving a question in the chat box. I would invite also all the participants to keep sourcing their questions in the chat, which you can find on the lower side of your screen normally. So there's one question around how do you collect and verify the emission of data? Andy, do you wanna take that one maybe?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So for us at Cargo, we use a system called Vezon IMOS, right, which is our operating system today. And so any vessel that we sort of take into the marketplace is within Vezon IMOS, so it collects all the data on the voyage. So it tells us exactly the distances that the ship has traveled, whether it's a ballast leg, whether it's a laden leg. It also tells us automatically in terms of how much fuel is being consumed. So we're able to collect all that data within that system. So therefore we're able to extrapolate all that information to be able to calculate the emissions. For the voyage charter, it's a little bit more tricky because it's the ship owner themselves who are essentially operating the ship. I say today, 95% of all the business we do today is on time charter, so we have the information, so it's only a small proportion we don't have. And so by using the Sea Cargo Charter clause, we're able to get all the information from the ship owner to be able to calculate all that information. We also as well are using a third party as well to help us validate the information and the methodology. So in terms of the Sea Cargo Charter, there are different pathways to be able to do this different calculation, but that's how we calculate that information today.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And since you're at it, we received also another question around more the timescale for implementation. When do you think when will the first report be out for the Sea Cargo Charter, and do you expect there to be savings immediately? I think Andrew is on mute.
Okay, so we're already sort of putting our emissions out there in terms of our corporate sustainability reports, and we're doing that for the last 3 years. So we will be doing it in terms of, I guess, for ourselves, we'll be reporting through to the Secretariat. We can do that by the end of the year, right, when we have our annual numbers for 2020. And all the other signatories as well are going to be reporting as well over the next sort of 12 months. So some companies need to get a little bit more, I guess, up to speed in terms of being able to report that information. And so each company will have a slightly different timescale, but certainly for ourselves, we'll be able to do that relatively quickly.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Andy. For sure, the signatories can continue to join the Sea Cargo Charter at any given point in time in the future, and the first year of reporting is adapted to whenever they join in the year. We also have some questions a bit more related to the IMO. I don't know who between the two of you, Andrew or Claire, want to take that one. But what should IMO do to leverage this initiative? And there was another question which now is lost in the chat. What would be the response to the Shipowners Association suggesting that this should be also carried out by the IMO? How do you see the Sea Cargo Charter fitting with the IMO?
I think maybe if I start and Andy can build.
Thanks.
We certainly see the Sea Cargo Charter as being entirely compatible with and consistent with the IMO's ambitions, and it's a way to enable what we see in terms of shipping decarbonisation is the need for the entire value chain to participate in decarbonising the shipping industry. It's not just the responsibility of ship owners, and this is a way for charterers to come to the table and to start increasing the transparency around the emissions from their operations. And certainly as Shell, we do see a big role for ourselves in multiple parts of shipping decarbonisation and enabling us as an industry to meet the IMO's targets, whether that's the technical R&D needed to develop new fuels and new technologies, the technology development needed to improve efficiency of ships, and improving efficiency of vessels is going to be critical to enabling the use of zero carbon fuels in the future. And this is one step where we see that as a major charterer, we should be increasing the transparency around the impacts of our emissions and trying to reduce them.
Yeah, and just to add on to that too, right? I mean, the Sea Cargo Charter is not trying to replace the IMO, right? The whole idea is just trying to sort of make sure as charterers, as Claire said already, we're part of the whole supply chain, right? So it's also the duty of the charter to do their piece too. There's many a time the ship owners themselves are not operating the asset, right? And so therefore, as a charter, we have that responsibility to say, well, if we're going to be operating that asset, then we need to make sure as well that we're being responsible. So we need to play our part in the whole supply chain.
Thank you, Andrew and Claire, for sharing your views on that. We have some additional questions as well coming in the chat. I can see. We talked about enforcement, and you mentioned the Sea Cargo Charter clause as well before, Andrew. And so we have two questions a bit related to that. How does the clause differ from IMO DCS? And also around, is the Sea Cargo Charter binding, and if so, to what extent?
Okay, so first of all, I don't know I'm going to show my ignorance here. I'm not quite sure what the IMO DCS is or what it stands for. The Sea Cargo Charter clause is something which is it's not arduous. It's just really asking for information to be reported through to the charter in terms of what is the fuel being consumed on that voyage. Is it a binding clause? I mean, it's a clause which is trying to use in terms of our charter parties. It will probably get amended from time to time, slightly, depending in terms of what we're asking for. But it's purely just a matter of actually asking for some type of reporting tool to be able to report through the fuel consumed. It's nothing arduous, and it's nothing binding to the ship owner.
And I think maybe the question was also around the enforcement of the Sea Cargo Charter per se. Are the signatories required to publish, to report and to publish their alignment scores, or is it on a voluntary basis and so on? I think the question was maybe also to that effect.
Yeah, so it's an enforcement, right? So if you're going to sign up to the Sea Cargo Charter, there needs to be transparency. So therefore, you need to report all those different numbers. It's not about hiding anything. It's also just to make sure as well that as an industry, as a charterers, we're able to report things up, and we're able to see how well we're tracking, year on year. Because as I said before, we do actually sort of play a part in the environment, and we need to sort of do our bit too.
Thank you. I can see there's a question, an additional question that refers to the recent proposal from Trafigura around the carbon levy for the IMO, asking if the charter is on board with that. You probably can provide an answer to that, either Andrew or Claire.
Yes, I can. Shell supports putting a price on carbon emissions from the shipping sector because we see it as a way to provide additional economic incentive to develop the new technologies that will enable decarbonisation. Obviously, such a pricing mechanism will need to consider how best to direct the revenue towards in-sector research and development. But in principle, yes, we support putting a price on carbon emissions.
Yeah, and as Cargo, we're exactly the same, right? We do believe that you need to have new innovation, new technologies, and the only way to do that is through some type of fund. So it needs to be administered properly, right? But if we want to make the change in terms of the dial here, we need to invest in it, and this is one way of doing it. We think that's the right way of doing it.
Thank you. And with the IMO currently has a set of ambition expressed in the internal strategy, as you know. Do these provide enough clarity, or could they be improved according to you or Sea Cargo Charter?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again, Louise? Sorry.
Yes, of course. So the IMO currently, as you know, has a set of ambition expressed in the initial strategy. Do these provide enough clarity, or could they be improved?
Well, it's a starting point, right? I mean, we have to start somewhere, and I think as responsible charters, we came together and said, look, we need to make a start. It may not be perfect to start with, and that's the whole idea. As part of the Secretariat, there are going to be working committees to try and see how we can improve over time, right? But I think we believe at those moments in time it's the right thing to do. It's the right starting point, and we'll see how we develop from here.
Exactly. Claire, do you have any insights also to share? Shell has recently committed to a net zero target. So obviously the decarbonization trajectories of the Chicago Charter are in line with the IMO, but don't also prevent signatories from going beyond.
No, and obviously we fully support the IMO setting challenging targets for the industry, and certainly we would welcome more ambitious targets. We would welcome targets that, as you alluded to, we've set ourselves a net zero target for an energy business in line with society and the IMO's ambitions. So we would welcome targets that put the industry on a trajectory for net zero by 2050. But obviously, at the moment, the Sea Cargo Charter, we are fully aligned with the IMO's targets, but we would welcome more stringent targets for the industry to push that technological development that Andrew was just talking about.
Thank you, Claire. There's an additional question, which I don't fully know how comfortable you both are with the Poseidon Principles, but someone is asking, how do you see the connection between the Poseidon Principles, the Chicago Charter, and the IMO regulation, and how will all contribute in the CO2 reduction pathway to zero emissions? There's I think it's very much also to this link that Michael Parker from Citi, the chair of the Poseidon Principles, very much often makes between the responsible charterers working with responsible ship owners financed by responsible banks.
Yeah, and I think I would probably put that in exactly the same way. It's part of enabling the whole shipping value chain to play its part. Because we are, as an industry, we are quite fragmented. There are many different players, many different actors with different roles, and therefore having a set of principles that target different segments, enable them all to come forward and play a role. Yes, I don't think I could put it better than Michael has himself.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'd agree.
There's a question as well regarding, will this scheme also target ships below 5,000 gross tonnage? This is the side cutoff under the data collection, the IMO DCS, which normally for now at least is out of scope in the Sea Cargo Charter.
Well, I think it's one of those things whereby over time we may start looking at that. I think again we've got to start somewhere, and there's obviously a lot of data we're collecting already. Right? And as you get more to the smaller ships, it's much more fragmented as an industry in terms of the coasters. Right? And there's also a lot of cabotage business as well. So I think it's something we may look at in the future, but I think for the time being, we want to start off at the 5,000 plus.
And certainly from our point of view, targeting the larger ships that are doing the deep sea voyages and that are responsible for the majority of emissions seems like a good place to start, as Andrew says.
Thank you very much, Claire and Andy. I think that we've come across pretty much all the questions in the chat. I hope that I've seen them all. It's been quite active, so I hope I didn't miss anyone. It's 10:30, so I suggest that if there's no additional question, we just keep it there. Thank you very much for joining the session today. If there's any additional question, you can always reach out to the info@chicagochar.org, and we'll make sure to answer the question, or I can also redirect them to Claire or Andrew if you have specific questions to them or to the other signatories. I'd like to thank the two speakers today, Claire and Andrew. Thank you very much for taking the time. Again, the UK delegation and my colleagues also behind the scene who are handling the tech on Zoom. Thank you very much for joining me today. And last but not least, thank you to each of you. Thank you for taking the time today to join this webinar. I know it's a busy week for you, and I hope that this webinar will inform your discussion for the rest of the week. So thank you very much for joining, and have a very nice day.